Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's Young Professionals session on careers in food sustainability. My name is Paula Boland, and I am the president of the UN Association of the National Capital Area, one of the largest and most active chapters of the UN Association of the USA, which mission is to educate and mobilize support for a strong US-UN partnership. And we do that through a variety of educational programs, professional leadership development opportunities, such as today's session, and advocacy activities. So if not a member already, please join our movement and get actively involved by visiting our website at unanca.org. As the world population continues to grow, much more effort and innovation will be urgently needed in order to sustainably increase agricultural production, improve the global supply chain, decrease food losses and waste, and ensure that all who are suffering from hunger and malnutrition have access to nutritious food. Many in the international community believe that it is possible to eradicate hunger in the next generation, and are working together to achieve these goals. The Sustainable Development Goal to end hunger, achieve food security and nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture, SDG number 2, recognizes the interlinkages among supporting sustainable agriculture, empowering small farmers, promoting gender equality, ending rural poverty, ensuring healthy lifestyles, tackling climate change, and other issues addressed within the set of 17 Sustainable Development Goals in the post-2015 Development Agenda. Beyond adequate calories intake, proper nutrition has other dimensions that deserve attention, including macronutrient availability and healthy diets. Inadequate micronutrient intake of mothers and infants can have long-term developmental impacts. Unfortunately, unhealthy diets and lifestyles are closely linked to the growing incidence of non-communicable diseases in both developed and developing countries. Extreme poverty and hunger are predominantly rural, with smallholder farmers and their families making up a very significant proportion of the poor and hungry. Thus, eradicating poverty and hunger are integrally linked to boosting food production and agricultural productivity and rural incomes. Agricultural systems worldwide must become more productive and less wasteful. Sustainable agricultural practices and food systems, including both production and consumption, must be pursued from a holistic and integrated perspective. Land, healthy soils, water, and plant genetic resources are key input into food production, and their growing scarcity in many parts of the world makes it imperative to use and manage them sustainably. Halting and reversing land degradation will also be critical to meeting future food needs. Given the current extent of land degradation globally, the potential benefits from land restoration for food security and for mitigating climate change are enormous. So you can see all the many potential careers out there that are going to be critical in order to address these challenges. Building resilience of local food systems will be critical to averting land-scale future shortages and to ensuring food security and good nutrition for all. Let me now pass the floor to Najat Nikabu, the co-chair of our Young Professionals program, who will be moderating today's discussion. Thank you so much for your participation. Najat.
Thank you so much for that introduction about the importance of food insecurity, the importance of sustainable agriculture, and just given that wonderful overview, Paula. Now, I am honored to speak to you all today and to have two fantastic guest speakers, Shannon Maynard and Tamara Stevenson. Both will go into detail about their backgrounds, but really quickly, briefly, Shannon Maynard is the executive director of the Congressional Hunger Center. And the Congressional Hunger Center is dedicated to essentially developing professionals, future leaders on the topic of hunger, on the topic of sustainable agriculture. Additionally, they are dedicated to advocating about hunger before Congress, as well as looking into sustainable practices, food practices in practice and in theory. Our second speaker is Tamara Stevenson. Essentially, Tamara is the CEO and the founder of WANDA. WANDA is dedicated to being an educator and advocator for sustainable food systems. Specifically, WANDA really upholds the pillars of how food sustainability must include the diverse voices of people of color in order to move forward, as well as many other agendas. Now, I'll pass it on to Shannon first to introduce herself, and secondly to Tamara. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Najad. It's great to be with you all. Again, my story actually starts and right now ends at the Congressional Hunger Center. I was a freshman in college, and I was part of a program called the Bonner Scholars Program, which was designed to give low-income students, first-generation students, the opportunity to volunteer and be involved in their communities while going through college, instead of having to work part-time to put yourself through college. And through that experience as a college student, I started volunteering in community, working with young people, and really quickly seeing the food insecurity in their lives. And so by the time my freshman year ended, I somehow found this unpaid internship in Washington, D.C. with this new organization, the Congressional Hunger Center, almost 30 years ago. And because the Bonner Scholars Program provided a stipend for you to go have summer experiences, I was able to come to Washington, D.C. and take that unpaid internship with this new organization, at that time founded by Republican and Democratic members of Congress, to keep hunger at the forefront of political debate. And so fast forward 30 years later, here I am. I never would have thought that I would be the executive director of that organization. But my internship put me on a path to actually apply to the Bill Emerson National Hunger Fellowship, where I ended up focusing on food security issues. I actually went back to my college after that summer in DC, where I realized just how critical policy is to addressing social issues. I really had come at many issues from a charitable perspective, but I started to quickly see that where in my community in Appalachia, where I grew up, I was considered well off because I was not on the federal nutrition programs. But when I got to college, I realized, oh, I'm actually the poor kid on campus relative to the opportunities that the folks around me had, and just started to realize why, ask why, and see why, and the systems and the history of laws and structures that have led to the haves and the had-nots and disparities in terms of who had access to certain opportunities and who didn't. So I spent the first half of my career working on U.S. food security issues, and then really youth engagement, and knowing that young people have been at the heart of every social movement, really wanting to make sure that young people were engaged in both service, but also civic participation, voting, showing up at their local council meetings, asking, not just going and tutoring students, but asking, why do these students need tutored anyway? Why are the, asking why gets to the root causes of issues. And so that just became a passion for me and my work. And the first decade of my work was focused domestically. I worked for local food security initiatives in South Florida. I ended up coming to Washington and working for a nonprofit called YSA, focused on engaging young people in service and civic participation, and then joined the federal agency AmeriCorps, where I had various roles, but ultimately led strategic initiatives for that agency. And then I had an opportunity to pivot and go join the Grameen Foundation. I was very interested in sort of working globally. My husband is from Peru. I have a lot of friends from around the world. And there was an opportunity to launch a program called Bankers Without Borders to harness the volunteer and sort of human capital of private sector to help microfinance institutions and other social enterprises scale their services, improve their capacity, be more effective. And again, it was through that work that I realized that most of the world's poorest people are smallholder farmers. And so it brought me back to my days at the Hunger Center and just, again, looking at the irony in that the people who are producing our food are often, the most food insecure. And that can play out here in the United States as well. And so I spent about a decade working at Grameen Foundation, launching this social enterprise. I ultimately became responsible for talent and knowledge within that organization. And just, and in that work, a real proponent for local leadership and recognizing just becoming very questioning of the role of expats and the role of Western society in development and some of the, I think, assumptions that come with you when you're from the United States and you're from certain organizations and you're going into the developing world. There's just sometimes a bias and privilege that you have that so many people take for granted. And so I started to become an advocate for investing in local leadership, making sure that we were hiring country directors from country and trying to really challenge this need to bring in talent from the outside. And that led me back to the Hunger Center, which is focused on fighting hunger by developing leaders and working both domestically and globally. And so I could have never told you with each of these moves where I would end up. But the Hunger Center, I think, bridges all of my interest in helping people realize their potential, helping organizations realize their potential, recognizing that it takes different levers for social change these problems are huge and we need folks working to create agency in the lives of smallholder farmers today, in the lives of US citizens and residents experiencing poverty and food insecurity here. But we also need people who are willing to do the research, do the advocacy, do the organizing that's going to put political pressures on policymakers who have the power to create sweeping changes, right? It's been policy after policy that's gotten us over hundreds of years to the systems, the inequitable systems that we have today. And policy is a critical role, plays a critical role if we have any chance of eradicating global food security. So that's my story.
Tamara, we'd love to hear more about, your story and your particular journey.
Thank you so much. And I'm so happy to be in communication and conversation with UNA. Thank you for hosting, as well as with Shannon as well. My journey begins a bit differently. I did not always see myself being at the helm of an organization focused on gender, nutrition, agriculture, but it really began with turning what I perceived to be my weakness into my superpowers. I hail from the great state of Oklahoma, where I'm fourth generation Oklahoma, and I grew up knowing and having to study agriculture. It was just part of our education to have a greenhouse on our high school campus. I went to just a regular independent school district in Oklahoma City, outside of Oklahoma City in Midwest City, and had to become a FFA, Future Farmers of America member, where we mostly learned about livestock, agriculture, not about the fruits and vegetables later that I learned in nutrition, which I really stumbled in as a first generation college student at Oklahoma State, being the only African-American in my program in nutrition. And though we had a College of Ag right next to our college at the time called Human Environmental Sciences, there was no interconnection, no engagement together, only through the nutritional research that I did on rat models, doing bone mineral research, studying trace elements through their excretion. And so it was through really being in different labs at every summer from Baylor Med, Texas Children, UPenn Med, Harvard Public Health, then later studying abroad funded through the Boren National Security Scholarship in Pucamaima and Santiago, that I began to kind of evolve away from thinking that really I wanted to be a bilingual military teaching physician, and was really set out on that path. But with each encounter and new experience and learning about public health, I realized that that was a better fit for me, because I realized I thought more systems thinking and big picture, even though the trees are important, but I did like thinking about the forest. So setting eyes, seeing at the time the Surgeon General, who her name escapes me, but as a Black woman, it made me realize representation does matter, and being able to see yourself in ways that you may not have when you're in a state where you don't see a lot of representation of what it means to grow up in the heartland in America. So Washington, D.C., along with Atlanta and Houston, were the three health meccas that I kind of identified of where I wanted to land. But after studying health communication at Tufts Medical, which was #1 in community health at the time, through US News, I wanted to focus on, coming to Washington, D.C. at any cost. And so I was able to get in the Emerging Leader Program via their Health and Human Services, working in the Secretary's office, where I got to take on a range of different projects, whether it's small business, health IT, when health IT was just starting up with electronic medical records, along with diabetes initiatives and just a range of issues. And then realizing that because I thought very systems integrated, I also had experience studying business at BUB school while at Tufts and Emerson, which was a joint program. And so I ended up landing at Minority Business Development Agency, MBDA, under Commerce, which also checked the box of my requirement for the Boren, which you have to repay in service by working with certain federal agencies or down in Quantico. So being able to be at MBA kind of like fused my two interests of like the need to understand economic security is just as vital as health security and food security when it comes to our overall national security. And so now, fast forward, having Katrina really played a critical role in me thinking local and going to the mayor's office to work on women's policy, which was just starting up under Fenty and victim services, of framing out a local agenda of what it means to have women empowerment from a health and economic perspective. And so it was those experiences, along with eventually working for some international NGOs that many people know around town, developing out really doing backstop around MQ-SUN, scaling up nutrition initiatives through the UN Secretariat, and others that had me like peer into the research around, there's a lot of high multi-sectoral kind of conversations happening around ag and nutrition, but there's a big gap when it came to really connecting at the grassroots level of women, of everyday women leaders who are making a difference in their homes and their communities. And I just saw that as an opportunity to really focus and narrow in on, especially given the fact in the field of nutrition, we have a decline when it comes to people of African descent in the field, meaning like less than 2.5% out of a field that's close to 100,000 in membership. And then when you look at Black farmer loss, it's even more tragic in the country, even though I grew up with a family still today active as cowboys, ranchers, cattlemen, doing livestock production back home. I know and realize that was not everybody's reality of knowing where their food comes from. And then having a Ghanaian stepfather where, goat farming is a big deal in Oklahoma, as much as cattle. And so being able to like literally go and get your meat like that day, I didn't realize how much disconnected that the everyday American was when it came to their food. And so for me, it became an opportunity to say like, well, how do we make an impact. And so I spent time as an extension agent at UDC on the nutrition side and working with also those on the ag side to make the connection around the need to promote African crops at the community level, and the need to understand that our heritage foods is our medicine. And right now, the food is medicine movement, there's a lack of focus around African foods, which is tragic. And when we think about the diabetes and heart disease outpacing TB and HIV globally, like in Africa, as much as heart disease even being number one, even in the midst of this COVID pandemic, that something has to give, and understanding like we need not only troops on the ground in terms of training more folks in agriculture and nutrition, but also when it comes to the supply and equipment that we need, which is in our food system as well, must change. And so with this upcoming conference that the White House is doing around hunger, nutrition, and health, this is an opportunity for us to think about how do we ensure that we get the voice of everyday people in our communities. I live in a food apartheid here in Washington, DC, and serve on our DC Food Policy Council and try to elevate the conversation as a board member at USDA on the NARI board of understanding that we have to think about equity and diversity as really a critical part in our bottom line, that in order to have an inclusive food system, we're ensuring that food democracy is alive and that everyday people are food citizens, and they're not just voting with their fork, but they're also voting for candidates that put food on the agenda, because food is political, it's power, it is our identity, and it's our culture. And so we look at ways in which we can educate people, particularly women of color, to see themselves as these food sheroes in our communities that we saw really rising up in the midst of this pandemic. When there was no lunch lady, you were it, I was it as a mom of two, and understanding that we have to unlock that power and potential that we have every day to make an impact in our food system that feels so aloof to us, but it actually is very critical to the lifeblood and security of this country. So I look forward to more questions, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you both so much for that. I mean, what a wonderful, both of you, what a wonderful introduction to really emphasize the common thread here, that you can come into agriculture, sustainable food systems from any angle, from the public health perspective, from the policy angle. And I think that should be inspirational to all of us, right? And with that, I'd like to ask, what advice do you have to other professionals who seek to join the field, whether it be an academic angle, like what should they do, whether they're in undergrad or in graduate school, or just like trying to get certifications, what should they do professionally to prepare themselves to get into this field? It'd be great to hear your perspectives. And Tamara, you could take it on, and then we move on to Shannon.
No problem. So I would say, recently I did a TEDx talk at GW about how women can reclaim food as medicine. And for whatever reason, I was nervous in preparing for that. And I thought about, what it takes to have a good talk. And it's about making meaning of the mess. And so I would think about, even today, how to reverse engineer your life and what are the lessons. And so I came across learning about Ikigai, knowing that whatever your passion, your purpose, if you can make profit, how all of that must be in alignment, and then living life with no regrets became critical in how I thought about my path. There was no one or initial images that I saw. I literally had to seek it out, almost like Harriet Tubman seeking out freedom on the Underground Railroad. Sometimes the very things that you need to make a difference is right before your eyes, in terms of thinking like an entrepreneur, seeing problems out in your community and wondering, do you have the skill, the talent to be the problem solver? And when you solve the problem, how do you sustain it? Initially, I was providing free nutrition programs in my community of historic Anacostia, not at the time knowing about or thinking about grant programs or any of that. It was out of sheer passion of wanting to help heal my community once I understood what nutrition did for my life and wanting to be a testimonial to that cause. And then later realizing like, oh, I can make this formal. I could start the nonprofit, apply for the grants, find the funders. But that took identifying those programs, getting into incubators, getting into entrepreneurship programs. And I would say no matter what your path is, having been a government, what we call a federati, you can lose your identity in a system like that. You feel like a cog in the wheel. And with my father dying, it became a catalyst for me to realize that life is short. You want to really live life on your own terms and with no regrets. And so I would say, think, how do you want to honor your ancestors? What is in your own background? Agriculture was always in mind, but I never saw that as a value, but I do now. And then understanding how do you make that sustainable, finding mentors. And if you do reach out to folks, make it symbiotic. I don't believe in extractive relationships. I think part of this work is understanding the colonial tactics that have been used that have oppressed people in this developing of this food system. And so understand that you have to reverse engineer whatever has been done before, course correct. So even if society has not done on a major level, and so that means if you ask something of someone, think, what can I do in return? That should be the natural belief system. I've been a mentor myself, and it's been a bidirectional relationship. I even gained from mentoring others, but it was only through lived experience for me to understand that everything is relational, just like our ecosystem. So mirror your life like the ecosystem is what I would have to advise.
Great. One of the things we do at the Hunger Center is try to work with all of our fellows who are early in their careers to create their own personal theory of change. Like, how do they want to make the greatest impact on the world? How do they see these issues, and where do they see themselves being an actor in the space? And so I think that, like, having your own personal theory of change, your own personal creed that you carry with you is important, and knowing what your strengths are. My strengths are, I'm strategic, I'm a good communicator, I'm good at individualization in terms of adapting and getting the best out of different people. And so all those things have led me, if you look at my career path, I believe I'm committed to fighting for social justice and looking at inequities holistically and at the intersections, right, of issues, the intersections of identities. And so I've brought that with me to different places in my career, right? But it's not my career path has been all about being open to possibilities. And I think folks have to be open to possibilities. There is this false narrative, I think, particularly in international development, but it gets constructed in lots of different sectors, is we try to make things too complex and in fact, to keep people out. And so there's this worship of the expert, the subject matter expert. There's this worship of the certifications. And I would just challenge you to pursue what's interesting to you, but recognize that you also need all leadership capabilities to influence change once you know just what the problems are. And you need to, you don't need to have a PhD to ask good questions and to enter spaces. And sometimes just asking those questions helps people simplify things. And that's what I've learned when I went into when I switched over to Grameen Foundation from working in the domestic sector. I started to realize, again, there were just all this terminology that, again, I would ask questions and be able to translate it for myself as an outsider. But I realized people don't want me to do that. They want me to feel like I don't know what I'm talking about as I entered this space around the role of mobile technology, right? Or the role of fintech. I mean, we create all these words to make things we reinvent things, right? We take other people's practices and we come up, we reinvent them as the next big thing. And so I just think asking questions will help you, and don't ever, and all those walls are put up to keep people out or keep people feeling somehow inferior. But there's so much content out there for free, right? MOOCs, courses, we have our own on Zero Hunger Academy, that if you're interested in learning about something, you can learn about it, right? But I think the other things, practically speaking, know what you're good at and put that to work practically, whether that's volunteering, getting internship.
I think we may have momentarily lost Shannon there.
Am I back? No?
Yes, you are.
Oh, I was saying something people can do is get involved in policy initiatives, right? Like, we like to make that also seem more complicated than it is. But whether it's your local official, your state official, your federal officials, your elected officials, they're there because someone put them there, you did, and they're there to listen to your concerns. And trust me, there are lots of special interest out there trying to share their concerns, and there's not the strong, monetized lobby for global food security that there is for gun control, for example, right? And so have you voiced just even the importance of these issues right now on Capitol Hill, right? We're looking at trying to get more money to go into, the humanitarian assistance that's needed around the world. I mean, we are in a global food crisis, like we were already in one, and now it's going to be catastrophic if we don't act and do something. But people become numb to this, and we need to make sure voices are heard, because billions of dollars are at stake that translate into people's lives. And so, right, any one of us, we should not be intimidated to pick up the phone, to ask for a meeting, to write a letter, to call on these issues that we care about, and learn enough about them so you feel comfortable. But don't feel like you have to be the expert in all, right? These are food, agriculture, our food systems are complex and wide ranging. And it's important to understand and think systemically, but you don't have to be the expert in every area. Figure out what's of interest to you, what your strengths are, and ultimately where you can best be utilized to achieve your purpose, and be one pathway to engage in this work.
Yeah, no, you guys are both absolutely right. When it comes down to it, it's about having that intellectual curiosity, asking the important questions, asking the questions that no one else is, for yourself and for your community. And also, putting in the work, really getting yourself out there, and not being afraid. I really love that last point, Shannon, because there is this imposter syndrome, especially with younger professionals. Like, am I good enough? Do I know enough about the subject to even ask questions about it? I don't want to ask a quote unquote dumb question. So the list goes on. Thank you so much, both of you guys, for giving that overview. Now, we went over, more so the general aspects of what's needed to get into this field. But Shannon, I'd like to ask about specifically the programs, the fellowships at the Congressional Hunger Center. I want our audience members to, have concrete step-by-step takeaways after this call. So if you would, delve into those programs, that would be great.
So we run 3 fellowship and internship programs. The first I'll mention is the Mickey Legland International Hunger Fellowship. And it is a 2-year program where we typically
Uh-oh, I think we may have momentarily lost her. But in the meantime, within the chat, you'll see that I have linked the Congressional Hunger Center's website. And essentially, you'll have like an overview of all internships, their publications, as well as their fellowships, if you're curious to learning more and to simply applying to what they're doing. But I hope to have Shannon on in a bit. I guess we could always shift it over to Wanda and specifically what Wanda is doing. Wanda has many amazing programs as well. Tamara, I'd love for you to delve into how Wanda curates its programs, as well as, a lot of its educational workshops.
Yeah, we actualize our vision through the 3 domains of education in the form of our Wanda children's books, which are bilingual. The first is in English and in Hausa, and we make others in different African languages as well, with a focus of creating really our version of Smokey the Bear for our cause, which is Little Wanda, who encourages the importance of learning about African crops to help with health on the continent. So Little Wanda first travels to Nigeria to tackle diabetes that her nana has, and learning about millets and hibiscus to help with that. And then the other area has been through the development of our Wanda Academy, which was initially supported through the DC Healthcare Finance and Sibley Memorial Hospital, to be an online platform for women to have a safe and supportive sisterhood, to learn about cultural nutrition literacy and connecting them to women who are farmers and food retailers, and to show that we're not simply consumers, but producers as well. And that has been a really great space to be in, to democratize nutrition education, which is important. On the advocacy part, this has been involved in letter writing. We were part of the letter writing for the White House Conference on hunger, nutrition, and health, as well as other pieces of legislation at the federal and local level, such as nutrition equity bill, as much as the flavored tobacco issue, because we see the issues around big food and big tobacco are very much in link together. When it comes to overall health, those are the 2 big concerns when it comes to health prevention or disease prevention. And so advocacy also is the need to leverage the power of the kitchen table and turning that into sites of advocacy, as we look at the work that Dr. King did in Black restaurants in the civil rights movement. And so this is where our Sisterhood Supper Challenge comes into play, that yes, we learn about the importance of self-care, but also how do we cook for change. And so we have an event coming up on Juneteenth, which is our Sisterhood Supper Juneteenth celebration in Ward 8 at the Well, which is a Saturday at 2 p.m., where we will be coming together around celebrating local food heroes, but also encouraging women to submit their recipes of resiliency and ritual and restoration into our community cookbook that we're forming, to show how the power of food has helped women to not only survive this pandemic, but also thrive as local food leaders that we want to acknowledge. And so beyond that, when it comes to innovation, we have focused on the need to, again, leverage technology, leverage education and the forms of entertainment. We've created not only music, working with Nigerian artists, but also animation that pre-pandemic, we would go into classrooms and share the story of Little Wanda to kids to help inspire them to see themselves as a food hero, just like her. And beyond that, since this time of the pandemic, we had created the Wanda Fellowship, which those are partnership opportunities that we do with those who are organizations, corporations, that want to help diversify their talent in their workplace. And so we kick that off with Good Food Market and placing a nutrition graduate in their workspace to give her the opportunity so she can be that future dietitian. And lastly, our endowment. Through our Food Hero Freedom Fund, we kicked that off last year, which that fund is to help invest in education for women who are pursuing degrees in agriculture, nutrition, dietetics. We set up our first endowment at Oklahoma State University with the support of Whole30 and other partners. And so we look to launch that fund again this summer. And the goal is every year, create a new endowment at different universities to plant that seed, no different than Johnny Appleseed of how do we bring hope, and hope comes in form of canceling that student loan debt that we're all know all too well, and playing whatever role that we can to ensure that we build that next generation of food leaders through the pipeline and platform of Wanda to leverage. And people can learn more at iamwanda.org.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you so much. I've actually linked that within the chat. You can find out about more about the specifics on the programs at Wanda through their website. So thank you so much for that overview. And Shannon, before we lost you, you were going over the specific programs that you guys all have as well. So if we could have that, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll be quick because I want to allow time for questions, but we run 3 fellowship and internship programs. The Mickey Legland International Hunger Fellowship Program. It is a 2-year program where folks spend a year working at the local level. So typically in countries around the world on a wide range of agriculture, food security interventions. They then spend the 2nd year of their fellowship working at the policy side, on the policy side of the equation, at the headquarters or regional headquarters of the INGO in which they're placed. And so we'll begin recruiting for that fellowship in the fall because it runs every 2 years. Our Bill Emerson National Hunger Fellowship focuses on domestic food security here in the United States. It's a 1-year fellowship. We recruit typically 20 people per year into that program. And folks spend 6 months, again, here in the United States, working at the local or state level on a variety of issues related to food security. And then they come back to Washington, D.C. for the second half of the fellowship, working on the policy side of the equation with organizations like Food Research and Action Center, Bread for the World, Share Our Strength, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Our Zero Hunger internship is designed for college students to create those opportunities for it's a paid 10-week internship program where folks apply, compete competitively, and are placed in global and domestic focused organizations here in DC to learn more about the role policy plays in addressing food security. And then we offer a summer seminar series, which is free to anyone, including many of you, if you're interested in joining every Friday over the course of the summer, to introduce them to a variety of experts and cover a variety of topics over that. What's unique to all of our fellowships, we prioritize recruiting BIPOC participants and folks who've experienced hunger and poverty into our programs because we believe that much like NASA wants rocket scientists to be designing rockets, we need people who understand the problems firsthand as part of the solutions. With respect to our Legland Fellowship, we also apply a power and privilege lens to the work. So folks coming into the program are really looking critically at their role in international development and the role of U.S. government in international development. And really looking at how we decolonize aid. One of the things we've done across all of our fellowship programs to make sure that we're being equitable ourselves and inclusive is set our stipends to be livable, right? There are a lot of programs where Peace Corps, AmeriCorps included, where, oh yeah, that's great that this is a, national program and hundreds of thousands of people can participate. But it's not great when you look at the livability of the stipends. And so we really strive to make sure that anybody can come in and participate in our programs. We're in our 30th, will be our 30th year next year. So we have this amazing alum network of almost 1,000 individuals now who have participated in those programs and truly are leading change domestically, globally, across government, the nonprofit sector, and the private sector. And so part of the benefit out of joining our fellowship programs is obviously the experience, the investment in like intentional learning of our fellows and interns over that 1 to 2 years or 10-week process. And then you gain membership into this once a fellow, always a fellow in terms of the network. And right now we're really focused on how we can lift up the voices of this very powerful network and continue to invest in that alum network, encourage more of them to pursue running for public office as one of those levers for change, continuing to pursue, executive leadership in their government agencies they're working at or on the boards of nonprofits, right? We want them at the top of the chain in terms of influencing change in organizations. And again, all of our programs you can find out about at hungercenter.org. And then to complement our leadership and internship programs, we have a suite of online tools at zerohungeracademy.org, where we partner with other organizations, again, to offer free self-paced courses, explainer videos that folks can use in their own advocacy and education efforts with their constituents, as well as like challenges and ways to like engage folks to better understand the problem. Because we feel like if you don't understand the problems, you can't really be part of the solution. And too many people come at these problems from this sort of charitable lens, and we want them to be applying a justice lens to this work.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Like a wealth of opportunities and information here. I really hope that the audience members came for or got what they came for rather. And on that note, I'd love to transition into Q&A with audience members. I'm sure, with all of this information, some people have some questions. I saw a few in the chat. I believe Tamara had addressed them, but we'll give time for Q&A right now. If you could just raise your hand, use the emoji hand gesture. Okay, I guess there aren't any questions at this time. Now I am curious, there's okay, I believe Maeve and Brandy. Okay, so Maya actually put her question in the chat. Shannon, you had mentioned creating a personal theory of change. How did you go about doing that?
So I think,
Oh, I'm sorry. I think that question, oh, actually, there are two questions in the chat. Go ahead, Shannon. Sorry.
Sure. We walked folks through a process, right? If you think about, I don't know if you're familiar with sort of organizational theory of change, but it's sort of work yourself backwards from the world you want to see, but think more specifically about your role in it, right? So, and so I think it's really about like, what are the values? We ask people to really think about what are the values that you hold dear and near and want to make sure that you're bringing into your work. Again, what do you see as your strengths? And ultimately, like the more specific you can start to get, and it may not be like, for me, it's about helping people. It's helping organizations and people value people and helping people realize their potential. And that can look like a lot of different ways and has looked like a lot of different ways over the course of my career. And doing that in the context of fighting for social justice. So for me, my personal change or my personal theory of change has been about helping the people right around me, really looking at my sphere of influence, because I think it's super important to walk the talk, right? And so what are all those behaviors that I can be modeling? Just as much as I want to have sweeping change with policy, at the end of the day, every day, I need to be able to come home and say, did I make the world a better place or a worse place for the people who came in contact with Shannon Maynard today? And that's something that's become very important to me. And so I know my values, I know my strengths, and I know that no matter what I'm doing, because I know I could be committed to working around various issues that are connected to poverty alleviation, right? So I don't have to be in one lane or focus. That's not what drives me. It may drive someone else. So knowing that is critical, but I know what my skills, my passions are, and how they can translate into different places in this work. And so that's what's having a personal theory of change will help you know what to say yes to and what to say no to.
That's really good. Having something that grounds you so that you're not just going anywhere that you're called to. The next question is for Tamara by Maeve. She was wondering if you could speak on the biggest food security issue, specifically in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I think it's a great question since we tend to think globally, but really it's an opportunity to act locally. And with that, the data that we tend to hear quite a bit is about the grocery gap, because maps, geography is very powerful to help to show disparity, particularly across the Anacostia River. When you look at west of the Anacostia, which we have approximately 22 plus grocery stores and counting, compared to approximately 3 with more onboarding when it comes to Ward 7 and 8, which the redistricting lines have changed because of the growth of population in the district. And so you'll find that you may be in Navy Yard, but now you're part of Ward 8 because of the need to balance the wards. But the data is important, but the real question is the data that is not being collected that we're trying to advocate for within DC Food Policy Council. And one of those comes to the profession of the nutrition and dietetics world. Right now, there has been no mandate to collect race gender data, nor is that information publicly available in terms of how many dietitians are in the district. Having in the past served on the policy committee for the DC Academy for Nutrition Dietetics, I just thought it was interesting. There was no interest of revealing this sort of information, but this is no different than what happened at the federal level with the health disparities report. There were people who simply didn't want to know the information. So the other big part to this conversation is the need to advocate for the data to create the change that we want to see in our communities. So grocery stores is not going to solve food insecurity issues. We have a number of nonprofits have had to stand in the gap like a Band-Aid to these issues that have root cause structural barriers that only really policy can change. And that's why informing the people of these issues and them coming to our food policy meetings, which are available at dcfoodpolicy.org. They are typically on a monthly basis, and we have workout groups, working groups, which I co-chair, nutrition and health. That's a way for everyday people to get involved, and you volunteer your time because this is something that you're passionate about. And separate from that has been actually access to capital is a huge issue for a lot of entrepreneurs who want to play a role in the food system. And so the Nourish DC Fund was one way to help address that with Black, Indigenous, people of color when it comes to ensuring that we have access to those who play a critical role, which is our small businesses. And so ensuring that small businesses are part of our local food economy is just as important as a food justice issue, as much as access to the food itself. And so there was a release of funds to help support more entrepreneurs who are either in the urban farming space as much as those who are in the food retail space. So those are quick ways in which solutions have been identified, but we're always finding new opportunities to look at how to address equity, which was not always in our language. And so I also want to share that, we tend to focus on food apartheid, which understands the structural issues, whereas food desert and food swamp are really legs to the body. And so we have also changed the language in which we use within the council to think about, just like a doctor, if you don't have the right diagnosis, you can't get the right prognosis.
Wow, that was powerful. And we have a few more questions coming in. The next is by Beth. She asked, do you have to be a part of an organization that is participating in hunger issues, or just an independent profession or just an independent profession that desires to be involved? I guess an independent professional that desires to be involved. She's part-time home care, so she's wondering how she can personally get involved.
There are great organizations like, for example, Results. I mean, you don't have to be, in terms of, if you want to get involved with policy making, you as individual can request a meeting, right, with your member of Congress or your local official. But if you want encouragement and you want to, camaraderie, there are great organizations like Results Education Fund. They do both domestic and global poverty work, and there are chapters around the country of other folks like you who want to do something from your living room. There are even political action groups that I know that are focused on funding, folks who are going to work and care about these issues once they're in political office. So I think, look in your community, there are local food policy councils. Johns Hopkins has a site and runs a center to provide access to see, if you're not here in the district, what is the nearest local food policy council to you, and is there a way to engage with them as a volunteer? So I think there are lots of opportunities, and I'm happy to connect. Folks want to email me. I think my email is smaynard@hungercenter.org, but I'm happy to put you in touch with some that I'm aware of.
That's awesome. We're coming in close to time, so I'll read off two more questions. The next is by Alessio, who asks, what advice do you have for someone with 5 to 10 years of unrelated business experience to enter in this field for international organizations or NGOs?
I would say, what are your transferable skills? Because I find sometimes everybody wants to be program officers or subject matter experts, and organizations working in this work have needs for event planners, folks who are good with databases, communications, a lot of functions that are transferable from one sector to another, one organization to another. So if you have those, you're marketable, and there's actually a lot more opportunity to make your way into an organization. So I think focus on what those things that you have that are transferable. But if you're trying to, it can be competitive too. So I think, attending events like this, attending lectures, taking courses, to just build your knowledge base of the work that maybe the organizations you're interested in working with do are, the more you can network as well. If you show your interest and your passion, you have transferable skills, there's definitely an opportunity.
And I'm going to read off one last question. What do you find is the best way for an individual to get their grievances heard by those in power and actually get them to respond?
I don't mind taking that one. So currently I'm at American University School of Communication doing a PhD in media technology and democracy. And one of the key reasons even why I'm doing it, which relates to your question, is understanding the power of platforms and what we've been able to see between leveraging Twitter, which is tends to be the way in which people connect to politicians and those who represent them. And understanding that we've seen it with our own eyes about democracy being under siege, and the role that social media can play in either spreading misinformation or not. And so what I would say is, you literally can create digital campaigns, with your friends, and helping to spread awareness about any cause, and understanding that, we call them hacktivists, and understanding the way in which you can leverage, what it means to be that one person. And it ties back to the other question earlier, that before I began any of this, I was just that Margaret Mead quote, imagine what happens when a few citizens come together to change, and just started volunteering my time with groups, nonprofits, meeting in basements and talking about, how do we change food policy before there ever was a council. And so I would say, find yourself plugged into an area and a space, whether it's online or offline, but they all are connected together and ultimately trying to create change. And so though you may have the small p of power, understand that you can leverage that to help change the big P in power. And is when people understand and know that, that's when real change happens. Most times we tend to see people not realizing their own power and potential, but it's because you are an ordinary citizen who can do extraordinary things by leveraging the people and the platforms around you. Those are the remarkable stories that really get the headlines. So that's what I would say you can leverage right in front of your eyes, your keyboards.
Thank you both.
I want to plus one that quickly and say, I had a meeting on Friday with a lot of other national anti-hunger organizations around TikTok. And I showed them, there's a woman, she does Food Justice Fridays. She has far more social media followers than any of us do. And she's probably your voice, and there are others like her. So I use platforms to make your voice heard, but also recognize that the number one members of Congress say influences them are in person, which today is a virtual, but like a virtual meeting. And as much as we do, the data is important, it's the stories that matter. And so what is your story? Why do you care so much about these issues? And what do you want them to know? And actually, asking your member of Congress for a meeting. And if they don't give it to you, well, then that's something to work on. Get someone else in there who will, because you're a constituent and you have power. So it's the personal and the individual meeting, but the platforms too. You can reach so many more people to get them to realize, hey, this is important and I should make my.
Thank you both so much for that, for this entire event. Actually, such insightful information, so much value here. I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm going to pass it on to Lanice. But again, thank you sincerely for giving your time to all of us. Lanice will give the closing remarks. Okay, well, I guess I'll just step in. Thank you both again so much. As I have mentioned, these are all not only valuable in theory, but like in practice, you're all given such valuable advice. The second thing is the fact that, this is just a small bit of what YP is doing. We want to hear more from the Shannons and the Tamras of our world. And if you were here tonight, just know that we have so many more events coming up. Additionally, our next event next month covers sustainability along with policy issues and climate change. So please be on the lookout for that. But again, thank you to our wonderful speakers, Shannon and Tamara, and everyone else who joined us tonight. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Have a good one, everybody.